In this conflicted world, you are all called to lead boldly into the future. Like Nelson Mandela did for South Africa and the world, you too can inspire hope and develop a revolutionary new way to think, act, and lead. Join your host, Ann Pratt, a Harvard Fellow and multi-awarded businesswoman, to unlock your success and leadership future.
Greetings to all you Future Bold leaders. Thank you for joining us from around the world. My name is Ann Pratt. I'm formerly from South Africa and relocated abroad to attend a Harvard Advanced Leadership Initiative Fellowship in beautiful Boston in the United States of America. Today, our thoughtful bold leader is a smart pragmatist, born and raised in Germany and has lived decades in South Africa, a place he proudly calls home. He is a brandologist, a speaker, founder of the Future Leader Forum and the Future Jobs Summit, a business, government, and civil society platform to mobilize millions of opportunities for South Africa's vastly unemployed youth. He is a trusted voice in rebranding a nation, leadership, and the future of work. His recent G20 Visitors Experience report completed after the 2025 G20 in South Africa is extensively referenced and quoted by South Africa's current president, Cyril Ramaphosa. He led South Africa's brand ambassador program for the 2010 FIFA World Cup, which up until that date achieved the highest visitor branding score in FIFA's history. Stay with us as he shares remarkable insights around being a go-giver instead of a go-getter, rebranding a nation, South Africa, for the 2010 FIFA World Cup, the first World Cup on the African continent, the multiple levers of motivational intelligence, and Nelson Mandela's X Factor. We warmly welcome my good friend, Dr. Nick Abel, affectionately known as Dr. Nick, and welcome to Leading Boldly into the Future. It's wonderful to be with you today.
It's a great pleasure, Ann, and thanks for having me.
That's great. So, Dr. Nick, as you're known, I thought a wonderful place to begin is, can you just share some career highlights, tipping points that have got you to this point? I know you grew up in Berlin in Germany, you have a PhD from a top institution there, but came to South Africa, I believe, in 1994. What are the key stepping stones that brought you to this moment?
I'm really a brandologist. I studied the history of brand leadership all the way from the Roman Empire to modern times. And I came out as a lecturer in 1994, just before the elections, University of KZN in Durban. And I had the good fortune of covering the rebranding campaign of Germany during the 2006 FIFA World Cup, when Germany really made a big effort to rebrand the country. As you know, Germany had a really tough brand image ever since World War II. And after that, so I did the research report. And after that, President Mbeki asked me to come on board the destination branding campaign for 2010 and help South Africa rebrand the country as a destination. That really changed my life in ways I could not have imagined. I spent the next 4 years basically dedicating myself fully to 2010. I was working with SA Tourism on developing a brand ambassador program for everybody in hospitality. Now, at the time, we had about 500,000 employees in hospitality in South Africa. Obviously, they were the face to the visitors. And the brand ambassador program was all about how to welcome visitors in such a way that they become brand advocates for the country. So we designed a program built on cultural intelligence, how to greet, for example, a visitor from France in their own language, the do's and don'ts, and how to touch on cultural touch points, such as their heritage, their history, and their traditions.
That's wonderful, Nick. I mean, and as we know, it was a strategic pause in the moment for South Africa, which at the time was going through quite a difficult moment. But yet the 2010 World Cup, I mean, kudos to you and your amazing team and the entire team that did that. It really was a moment of great pride in the country. And in fact, I remember my own euphoric moments with friends going to FIFA World Cup, but also just how the country was on pause in terms of some of its challenges at the time. Can you share with us a little more in terms of what were those touch points? You mentioned cultural intelligence. What were the touch points? What did you do? How did that roll out? And how did that make the FIFA World Cup in South Africa a success from South Africa's branding point of view?
Well, it was all based on President Beki's leadership, because he had made the brand promise on the eve of the closing of the German World Cup, which was obviously very successful. President Beki had promised to the world that we will host the most successful World Cup ever. And that meant beating the German benchmark of 88%. So 88% of visitors to Germany had actually stated they will recommend the destination back home to their friends and colleagues. The so-called NPS, Net Promoter Score.
Yeah.
So that was a benchmark. And we used a model called motivational intelligence, the 7 drivers of motivating human beings to respond positively. For example, assurance. There was, as you know, in the run-up to 2010, great anxiety all over the world whether South Africa would be safe. A safe destination to visit. Operation Blue Light, it was totally safe. There was not a single major incident during the 30 days of the tournament. It felt so safe that one night we even forgot to lock our front door, which is quite something in South Africa.
Yeah, it is.
Then another touch point, another motivational touch point was really connection. The key was to really unite the country and unite the country behind the team. So the marketing director of Sun International came up with a brilliant initiative, which was called Football Fridays. Every Friday, everybody would wear the Bafana shirt. So we truly became one team behind the team. And 2 days before kickoff, when Bafana took the tour to Joburg, Bafana coach Pereira said he's never seen something like that. He's never seen what he called the 12 men, the nation, being so united behind the team before the tournament.
Yes, I have fond memories of that, and our own teams at the office coming to work in their Football Friday gear. I mean, it really was very powerful. Are there any other of the touch points, Nick?
Yes, definitely. Another important motivator is contribution. So how did we make everybody feel they were actually contributing to the success of 2010? And that was the genius innovation of the Vuvuzela. As you remember, just by blowing the Vuvuzela, you actually did contribute. And even the visitors loved it. I never forget that, for example, Melrose Arc, where they had a lot of Mexican fans, they absolutely loved the Vuvuzela. It's an instrument that they could use to contribute to the success of their team.
And maybe for the benefit of our international audience, just share briefly what a Vuvuzela is.
Well, the Vuvuzela is a unique sort of musical instrument, a long horn that was invented, I think, there was a couple of fans, but it was invented in South Africa, and it makes a unique sound, a sound never heard before. It's a long piece that is, and basically, it's quite powerful in the sound it makes, especially if you have thousands of vuvuzelas blown at the same time.
Absolutely. And they make a very loud noise.
That's right.
I think it also appealed to people's sort of childlike rebel, to see who could blow the loudest noise, which often took people by surprise, or, parents on phone calls with kids blowing their vuvuzelas. And it was fun, actually. It was a fun thing to do.
And in a way, with all the turbulences leading up to 2010, I mean, there was always a talk about Plan B. We had incidents of xenophobia before the tournament. We had obviously load shedding, remember Coburg. But throughout all of that, everybody felt that somehow this was really an important way to grow the country, to grow tourism. And we were all involved, and it did grow. I mean, it really did grow the economy, and it grew tourism substantially.
And Nick, I'm not sure, but I mean, do you have any kind of ballparks around that?
It grew leisure tourism year on year, 1 year after the World Cup by 30%. An important benchmark is the exchange rate. The rand dropped or strengthened to 7 rand to the dollar. right following the event in 2010.
That is
And
remarkable.
obviously, it really did a lot for the infrastructure, new airports, new roads, and the Gautrain. My visitors from Germany were blown away from the Gautrain because not even in Berlin did they have a similar train. So it did a lot.
Yeah, indeed. And, just kind of transitioning from there, just more broadly, South Africa has been this miracle nation, euphoric moments of 1994, you arriving just before the elections in April 94, and the incredible euphoria and the magic of that transition from a very difficult autocracy into this modern democracy. And we've seen the country go through these waves, Nick, but, obviously also high profile are the recent protests in South Africa, and
Sure.
very devastating and upsetting. Broadly speaking, generally, what do you think are the big challenges?
Well, as a historian, I mean, I have to take a longer perspective. So what I mean is for the last 2,500 years, we have run this world on greed and fear. These are the primary motivators. And this has led to a lot of polarization, obviously across the world. We have a massive divide between people. We now have the digital divide. And I mean, Mandela always stood for unity, the rainbow nation. Unless we reunite people, we reunite the world, it's going to be tough. I think it comes down to that. We have to realize from a conscious leadership point of view that we are one. We are not divided. The old maxim of what the Romans used to call divide and impera, divide and rule, might work in in business, although I don't think it really does anymore. But it is very toxic in leadership, and it's terribly toxic in politics. And we cannot use that strategy anymore. We have to unite in order to thrive. I think it's as simple as that.
And I just want to pull out and unpack something you said. You said it may work in business. Do you think it works in business? I mean, if we have a look at, even the USA today has gone through incredible turbulence and troubled times. And the business community being called out to think, act, and lead differently. Do you think business can continue with that old model? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, not anymore, because marketers for so long have looked at segmenting markets and individualizing consumers. And they're now realizing that that's the wrong approach. You have to build communities. You have to build communities of purpose. And you have to look at what makes people common, the same, rather than different. And that is the new dimension in business.
Yeah. So if we it's very interesting. You came to this country as a lecturer in history, but you're now chairman and you founded, the Future Leadership Forum. What are these relationships between history and the future? What are the lessons from history? What is instructive about history?
Well, what's really instructive is that obviously we cannot continue seeing each other as combatants. We have to recognize that we are in this world together. We have to also recognize that we don't own this planet. At best, we're renting this planet. And the big question is, are we paying rent? Because we're now getting to a tipping point where much of the destruction that we have wreaked on this planet might be irreversible unless we really make a big effort now to restore so many natural resources.
Yes.
I think that's what's at stake. As I say, there's no planet B. And this is a very special planet in the universe. We are supposed to look after it.
Yeah, absolutely, Nick. And can you share with us a little more about your Future Leadership Forum? What are share a little about it. What is it designed to do, and how is it making an impact?
It's basically a 2010 legacy project, because so much around 2010, the success for the country was based on leadership, President Mbeki's leadership, and leadership across the board, because all of a sudden what you found, which was incredible, basically all political leaders, all business leaders, all societal leaders rallied behind President Mbeki's vision of making this the best World Cup ever, because everybody realized there would be benefits across the board. And so it didn't just unite the nation per se, it united business and government, it united business and society. And it all came down to leadership. So ever since, I really have been looking at how can we recreate that spirit, what they call the Gees of 2010. And it came down to leadership. And it was one big idea. And the one big idea was, look, this can be, we don't have to win the World Cup. Bafana doesn't have to win the World Cup, but it can be the greatest advertisement for the country ever. So the money spent was well spent. And so one big idea, and that's what I'm looking for. That's why I'm interviewing leaders to look for South Africa's next big idea that can propel the country into the top 10 countries to live in by 2025, according to the Prosperity Index.
That's a wonderful mission. And I know you've interviewed about 200 leaders from around the world, Nick. What for you has stood out? Are there any concrete examples you can share with us about a bold future leader, somebody that stands out in terms of who they are, but most importantly, what they choose to do and how they choose to think, act, and lead?
Absolutely. There are leaders like academics like Prof. Phakeng, Mamokgedi Phakeng from UCT, Vice Chancellor. And unbelievable. You talk about bold leadership. She really is a bold leader and very inspiring. You will find the interview with Barbara Creasy, who was on the moment when Madiba was in Zurich on the 15th May 2004, at the time of the announcement, when he was holding the World Cup. There was all the governmental leaders were in Zurich. The only one left was Barbara Creasy, who today is a Minister of Forestry, and she had to deal with the media. And when you listen to that story, it brought tears to my eyes. True inspiration. Sean Thompson, the great South African surfer, who lost his son tragically at an early age. I think the son was 16. And he then decided to turn his career into mentoring for children who are going through mental anxieties.
Sean Thompson was like a hero of mine, when I was a child growing up and just watching him surf on those amazing waves and in KwaZulu-Natal, really a remarkable human being. And we also know that Mandela was quite a mentor of Barack Obama's. What is it about Barack Obama's leadership that has stood out for you and brought him into this forum and this world of work that you're doing now?
Well, I think Barack Obama, when he was running for president in 2008, he really inspired the world. And it was a simple slogan, yes, we can, but it touched the raw nerve of people across the world, because basically what he was saying is, yes, we can. And that was one of Mandela's messages. We can be better. Yes, we can do more. Yes, we can uplift others. And yes, we can build a better world. And I think these are universal messages that are timeless.
Yes.
And what people like Mandela show us, there is a better way. And there is a better world out there.
You had a number of kind of special moments. Is there one that really stands out as a Mandela moment, a specific moment that you recall when he kind of lit the fire and inspired you or shaped you in some way?
Well, there's a couple of moments that have a lot to do with sport. So obviously 95, when he really boosted the rugby team to win the World Cup. Again, 96, and I met him in Bafana in 96, when he again inspired. That's what he did. He inspired Niltov, he inspired Bafana to grow beyond their own capabilities and win AFCON in 96. And then in September 2004, I had the honor of being a guest speaker at the Nelson Mandela Foundation. I had just finished a book about nation-building strategies from King Shaka, interestingly. And John Samuel, the CEO of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, really liked the analogies of King Shaka's nation-building and Mandela's nation-building. So that was a very special moment where I was basically addressing the staff and the partners of the foundation to continue living the legacy. That was a defining moment for me.
Yeah, I remember John Samuels actually, and of course, like you, I've had a very long, close connection with the Nelson Mandela Foundation. I was just wondering if you could take us back to 96, when Madiba spoke to Bafana Bafana. Can you just take us through just that experience? What happened? What did he say? What did he do?
He gave them the greatest gift anybody can give to basically future leaders, and that is to show them that first of all you believe in them. So he phoned the team. He phoned Neil Tovey, the captain, before and after each game. At a function before the tournament, he would speak with every single player, with their family and their children. So he made them feel special, and he showed them that he believed, and yes, they can. And the team manager of the Rugby World Cup or the rugby team 1995, Monet Duplessis, said that he reckons at least 30% of the team's performance was due to the Madiba, I think he called it the Madiba factor. 30% of their performance.
In the Rugby World
Yes.
Cup in
Yes.
1995. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. And of course, we have the film Invictus, where Mandela was played by Morgan Freeman, and Matt Damon actually played Francois Pienaar, the captain of the team.
That's right.
And it's interesting. So you're saying Morné du Plessis, who's a well-known South African rugby captain, he is saying that in that World Cup victory, you're saying he did 30% of that was the Mandela factor.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what is it about that Mandela factor, Nick, do you think is relevant for future leaders? What is relevant about that?
Well, I mean, I just love listening to Bill Clinton, what he had to say over the years about Madiba, because obviously he knew him well. And I think he really understood him quite deeply. And one of the things Bill Clinton used to say about Madiba is that he used to make everybody become better, feel better. And so his unique, I think he called it his uncommon gift, was he didn't focus so much on becoming great himself. Now, today we're living in a selfie culture. Everybody is trying to become great yourself. He focused on making others become great. And that simple principle for me is so powerful. Uplifting others, I think it's as easy as that. If you practice it, if you live it, you don't need to make yourself great.
Nick, I think that's such an important
Just
point.
focus on making others great.
Yeah. How would you respond to people who may say, well, you know what, he was already great. He'd already reached these highest echelons of, going from rural country boy to prisoner to president. He was a global icon, loved, admired, and respected around the world. What would you say to those people who are trying to climb that path and ascend? How would you respond to them?
Well, I think, and he alluded to it many times, I think it was a deliberate transformation. He once told Bill Clinton it took him 11 years to transform himself from the old archetypal warrior or hero leader to the new. In terms of archetypes, it's called the magician, the ability to unite a people, to energize, to call out the greater good. And obviously, he did that deliberately on Robben Island. And when he retired, that press conference, when he announced his retirement from retirement, he actually said what he misses from Robben Island is a time to read, is a time to meditate, is a time to reflect. And so it's not that easy. It has to be deliberate. It has to be conscious. And you have to make a big effort to basically what I call transform yourself from a go-getter to a go-giver. And there's this beautiful book by Bob Burke, whom I interviewed, The Go-Giver. And it works in life. It works in business.
That's a wonderful resource, Nick. You have these wonderful, big, bold plans for South Africa, and your passion is uplifting. What do you think Mandela would say to the leaders of South Africa today?
Today, I think what he would say, it's first of all, exactly what he said on his retirement speech. It's really in your hands. And I was just interviewing the CEO of General Electric South Africa. And he said, I asked him, what's your advice for the millions of kids out there that looking to start a career? They're not quite sure how to go about it. And he said, look, today there are so many resources out there. If you are resourceful, if you go online, if you ask others and you engage mentors, there's so much we can do. In fact, there's more we can do than ever, I believe. And so I think Madiba's call to action to say it's in your hands, and also, importantly, something the media never really reported about, at the farewell to his mentor, Walter Sisulu, I think 2003, he said, let us commit to our common goal. Let us build a nation of champions where all of us are winners. And that's it. As simple as that. All of us are winners. And he said so many times, poverty is man-made and poverty can be eradicated as easily.
Yeah. So if Madiba were still alive and he were president today, what do you think he would be focusing on?
I think he would be focusing on education. He kept saying education is a way to really change the world. I think what another lesson we should take from him, he was an avid reader. I think reading books is a fantastic way to self-educate yourself. And I think he would seek to reunite the country like he's done before.
Yeah, absolutely. And what do you think he would say to global leaders?
Well, interestingly, I mean, even in retirement, as you know, he was very active. He would speak to Jacques Chirac. He would speak to Gerhard Schröder. He would speak to Tony Blair. He would speak to President Putin and President Bush. And they all listened to him because he had something very profound to say. And that is something that we lost today, because with the advance of technology, we lost the ability to unite people. We lost the ability to do nation building the way Madiba did. And I think that's why they all listened to him, even when he was in retirement. And I think they would very happily reach out and just, if he was still around, listen to his advice.
And what do you think his message would be?
I think his message would be that we need to look at the bigger picture. We need to get beyond the little squabbles. And I mean, it's something that Bill Clinton said, that he had this uncommon gift. When he looked at you, he was looking into your soul. He could see what's going on, and he had just said the right words, and to touch you, to touch your heart. And I think that's what we need from leadership today. We need a caring leadership.
Yeah. Somebody once said to me, it's a currency of kindness and bringing that personal touch. What would you say to leaders around finding a way of creating this human touch and this uncommon gift, if you like, in this very technical digital world we're currently living in?
Well, first of all, we have now the ability to really provide food security thanks to technology. So there shouldn't be any reason why anybody on this planet needs to starve. We have the ability to provide housing. They're now 3D printing houses made from soil. So we should be able to provide food security. We should be able to provide housing security. We should even be able to provide water security, because there are new technologies on the market that let us generate water from air and other ways. I think that's what we need to do. We need to look at the basic human rights. So we have to reconnect. We really have to reconnect. Human beings need connection. We need it. We need face-to-face connection. We have to reconnect.
So do you think it's back to the old?
Well, what we really need, we need to shift in consciousness.
We know that Madiba also loved children, and he said that they are our future. And one could always assess the quality of a society by the way it treated its most marginalized groups and the way it treated its children. What do you think Mandela would say to the children of the world today?
That's a very good question. I think he would definitely encourage them to study, to read more, to spend more time on education. And I think we need to create that environment. I mean, in South Africa, as you know, you have a lot of households that are childless, and fatherlessness is probably a massive challenge in the country, across the world. We need to step up to that. We need to step up to that as fathers, as mothers, as parents. We need to create, that is our obligation. We need to create a better world for the future, for the next generation.
So, Nick, just with all these amazing people you've been interviewing, what is the big next bold idea?
Well, I think the next big bold idea will come from really putting our minds together. And as you know, when you are in a room with like-minded leaders, this is when the magic happens. And Napoleon Hill called it the third mind. He said that is what, in his days, the great business people like Henry Ford, Andrew Carnegie were doing. They had these masterminds. They created the third mind. That's what we need to do. We need to put our business sets off, take them off, and we need to put our leadership hats on. And we need to co-create. We need to co-create a better world. And the will is there. There's enough leaders who want to do that. So
how do you
it's
define
just a
the third
matter.
mind? Just share for us.
The third mind is if you and I and other like-minded people with a common purpose spend some time in one place to deliberate a common problem, we will come up with solutions that are much greater than the ones we would have discovered on our own. So it's literally 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 is 100.
Yeah, I get it. I get it. Nick, just pivoting a bit, just a couple of fun facts. What is your favorite childhood memory?
Spending time at the sea in Spain. My parents always took us to a little Spanish island. And the community, it was great. Just the feeling of the community. I loved that. Being part of that community in a little village.
Yeah, yeah.
Great memories.
So that sense of community was inbred at a young age, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And what is your favorite quote?
My favorite quote is probably Madiba. Nothing is impossible. And until it's done. Absolutely.
What is your favorite meal?
My favorite meal is very simple. Is chicken and veggies.
Really? Not a German Eisbein or
No, not anymore.
Not anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've been in South Africa 27 years.
What is your big, bold vision for the future?
Look, I've always said humanity, as you know, was born in this country. I think humanity will be reborn. My big vision for the future is that we become one community. We treat each other equally, and we live in what Madiba said in the most famous speech of all time. He said, a society where we live in harmony. That's what we all want. We all want to live in harmony, right? Absolutely. So why can't we achieve that?
Yeah. Well, that's the question, isn't it? And it's really about how do we develop and hone our human magic. You know, it reminds me of what Steve Biko said, the late Steve Biko, who said that, you know, the great powers of the world have done much to bring a military and industrial look, but the great gift is still to come from Africa to give the world a more human face, you know.
I believe so. Thank you. Thank you, Anne.
Friends, you can rebuild and rebrand a nation in the best and worst of times. In this turbulent geopolitical landscape, millions of people around the world are feeling anxious, fear, and sometimes even shame. There is a mental and an emotional fatigue, a disbelief, and soul-searching questions like, who are we as a human species? What has become of us? And importantly, what is the future we wish to see and be? Talking to my good friend, Dr. Nick Erbell, a keynote speaker, founder of the Future Leadership Forum, and the campaign lead of South Africa's brand ambassador program for the 2010 FIFA World Cup, demonstrates the undeniable ability, the human ability, to innovate, adapt, and transform, and deliver remarkable results to world-class standards under extreme pressure. Before the 2010 World Cup, South Africa was a nation on edge. FIFA had publicly announced its contingent Plan B for the host country. National issues captured media headlines: xenophobic violence, spikes in crime rates, rising fear, rolling and massive electricity blackouts, police crackdowns, and increased alienation. More than 1 million jobs lost in an economic recession, lives without mission or meaning. But instead of being stuck in despair, the nation got to work. using 5 levers of motivational intelligence, internal and external drivers that fuel human action, persistence, and limit those self-limiting beliefs. These 5 levers of motivational intelligence that Nick and his team tapped into include the human need, firstly, for reassurance, secondly, for challenge, thirdly, for connection, number 4, the need for human significance, and number 5, the human need for human growth. These touch points rebuilt and rebranded a nation. Just 3 of these examples in South Africa's transformation include, firstly, a shift from fear to reassurance. Operation Shield was a collective national effort which included communities and the proud men and women in blue who delivered safety and security beyond expectations. The second shift was a shift from alienation to connection. Passive citizens became passionate activists, fueled by Ubuntu. Football Fridays saw millions of South Africans wearing World Cup t-shirts anywhere and everywhere, in boardrooms and retail stores and classrooms. And meaningless lives found significance at home and abroad, fueled by a president's call to action to make this World Cup, the first on the African continent, the best World Cup ever. South Africa proved to itself and to the world its world-class standing. The 2010 FIFA World Cup tournament in South Africa hosted 32 teams who played 64 matches at 10 stadiums across 9 different cities. A 31-day national commitment delivered remarkable results. Crime went down, commitment went up. Reconnection, fueled by Ubuntu, reinstilled national pride. From a quantitative point of view, national tourism went up by 30%. In Cape Town, it went up by 47%. And Cape Town is still frequently voted the best city in the world, 7 times in the last 11 years, and most recently, just last year, in 2025. Massive new infrastructure welcomed the world. Modern top-tier airports, the high-speed Gautrain, and world-class national highways. And economically, the rand strengthened and went from 10 Rand 30 to the dollar in 2009 to 7 Rand 30 in 2010 and strengthened again to 7 Rand 25 the year after. Despite the despair and contingent FIFA Plan B, South Africa delivered remarkable results, the best results ever for FIFA, and remarkable results for the world and the nation. In the best and worst of times, you can rebuild and rebrand a community, a classroom, a corporation, a parliament, and even a nation. So until next time, remember that leading boldly is about making these thoughtful, clear choices. And bold leadership is about taking bold action, just one small step at a time, one step for you. But even in the best and worst of times, a giant step for humanity. Take care and take thoughtful, bold action.
Never miss an episode of Leading Boldly into the Future to learn more from your host, Ann Pratt, and her influential guests, the world's most inspiring industry leaders, bold disruptors, and courageous changemakers. Discover your full leadership potential. Go to ann-pratt.com and connect with her on LinkedIn. You too can take bold action, inspire hope, and soar to unimagined heights, because you are the future of leadership.